Previously in X-Men, editor Ann Nocenti and writer Chris Claremont are asked to create a jam comic to raise funds for famine relief in East Africa, starring our favorite band of mutant outcasts. I am Jason Lapidus, artist of Group of Seven, A Most Secret Tale, and Peregrines. Welcome to episode 154 of the ongoing read-through of the X-Men comics that became classic as we read Heroes for Hope, starring the X-Men, cover date of December 1985. So my good buddy Chris Sanigan can't be with us tonight. He's not feeling well. And we'll be getting to this issue when we come back next week with the following episode. And we'll get back into that whole kerfuffle between the Marauders and the X-Men. And hopefully the good guys win that one, but that's for next week. So taking a look at Heroes for Hope. I'm going to say Heroes for Hire, I think, a lot because that's just part of my the habit when talking about comics and that alliteration of H and H. Heroes for Hope, right? This is during that time period in the mid-'80s where the arts and creative communities and I guess, the mass media side of it, they were becoming increasingly aware and wanting to contribute to famine relief in East Africa. So we got songs like We Are the World. We got Live Aid coming out of the UK. Obviously, Marvel put this one together. And as the story goes, Jim Shooter on his blog, he credits both Jim Starlin and Bernie Wrightson, mostly Bernie and Jim for coming up with the idea, bringing that to Jim Shooter, and Jim Shooter then agreeing, thinking it's a great idea, and going forward to the X-Men office, which I don't think really was an office at the time. It was just, of course, Ann Nocenti, Chris Claremont, and Shooter says on his blog that they were the captains of the project, and the idea of it was to be a jam, meaning lots of people contribute together, and they come up with this unlikely product that you don't see, most of the time. And Shooter tells a long story about trying to work with, I believe it was called Oxfam America, and them just hating this idea and thinking that this was a completely inappropriate way to handle that. So a couple things about the cover. Right away we see it's Arthur Adams, so he is at this moment in time working in many facets for X-Men. He's working on Longshot. He's working on that cover for Classic X-Men #1. And the front piece of those comics, that series. He is working on X-Men Annual 10 and its predecessor, New Mutants Special #1. So he is entrenched in the X office doing these special projects. And this is like an absolute classic Arthur Adams cover, not just in the result, but in the pieces that are here. So, a mashup of a bunch of characters charging at the camera. There aren't many other artists that can claim to have such a fingerprint on comic book covers in this style, such as Arthur Adams. You could of course say Jack Kirby with that Avengers #4 with Captain America and the other Avengers coming at us. But this is like just classic Art Adams. I loved as a kid and still do all the striations in Colossus's muscles. I was looking at this as an anatomy lesson. I love how seriously he drew Colossus. Really somber, which leads into that version that we see eventually in the Mutant Massacre. I still like his costume for Rachel Phoenix much better than the way that Romita Jr. would do it. This one seemed like there was a costume element and some power elements, and not just those fire lines, those very loose Human Torch style fire lines. Very cool to see. His Nightcrawler characterization was always the most animated and animal-like of the other artists at the time. Rogue, pass on this one, not hitting it. And Magneto, unfortunately, was in that costume that we got to see in X-Men 97, but not the best version of Magneto, at least, and of course the two characters are there. Note, Rogue's hair is colored wrong. That's all fun. So that was a cool thing to see at the time, for sure. Heroes for Hope. Now, I opened this up, and right away, I saw that there was a signature there. And this is from my childhood. It looks to me like it says Romita Jr. 87. I don't remember meeting Romita Jr. ever. I remember meeting Romita Sr., but not Romita Jr. So I don't know what this is about. Maybe I did meet him and I don't recall. I don't know. I looked up to see if there was a John Romita Jr. Signing in Toronto, and I did not come across anything online. There was no record either way. Nothing from any of the conventions at that time period. They were pretty small. But maybe I did meet him. Who knows? I can't remember. The crazy thing here is the credits. I'm going to have to keep on coming back to this as we go through the pages, because the art team changes. As you can see, the writer and the artist change every few pages, and it's very noticeable. Orzechowski gets most of a good chunk of the lettering. Colors change a bunch of times too, and it isn't as big a deal as what we see in terms of the line art, that's for sure. We're not going to read through this plot. Basically, the idea is the X-Men face an entity that is causing the famine in some way, and they struggle with it. But we're looking at this mostly for the art and seeing what we can decipher from the pictures. Cool Phoenix, like I said, I like Arthur Adams' version of it better, but that's my taste. These lines out here, I feel like this is where you want to make it into a bird of some kind, just this output. And man, this really would have benefited from more color hold usage. So having these lines in another color as opposed to just black ink, I think it really would have benefited, but I digress. Very clearly John Romita Jr., obviously. Cool to see. And Stan Lee actually scripts this, supposedly. He's credited with it. Whether it's true or not doesn't really make a difference. And we get to see these JR pages, at least this one as well. Pretty loose stuff. The X-Men all being called to the front door, and off they go. And right away, things aren't what they seem. We're seeing an illusion of some kind or whatever it might be. And there's lots of dialogue to figure out that stuff. And right away, we get a change of penciler now for page 3. And this is John Buscema. And I can see here in that one for sure, lots of John Buscema, but the rest of it, not quite sure. Like the size difference of Colossus, pretty crazy. Loose stuff. On inks, this is Klaus Janson, who's one of my favorite inkers. I love him over John Romita Jr. and, of course, Frank Miller at this time period. Klaus is working on The Dark Knight Returns, right? He's inking Frank Miller's stuff in 1985. So that's pretty cool that he dips out for a minute to go do that. And you can see some similarities in his style at this moment, but that's cool. John Buscema and Klaus Janson. So yeah, Nightcrawler goes out to get Kitty. Right away, he bounces back. It doesn't work. So Wolverine's like, I can endure this. And he heads out, and he is starting to starve as he goes out there. As Kitty is still struggling, Wolverine's enduring this huge the impact of starvation on his journey there. Kitty also is starting to starve. Really a strange thing to have to draw. And I would say that I don't think the artists are up to the task of, I don't know what to say. It's weird. It's really weird. And there's this poor guy starving there as well. And then Wolverine pops his claws in, takes a strike at that guy. Turns out the guy is, I guess, the problem in some way. Things revert back to normal. They all head into the house. Art team changes again. Like, look how interesting this is. Like how made up that face is. Like how porcelain, and even like Wolverine, the lighting and the ink work on him, the delicate brushwork. This is Joe Sinnott, who is probably most famous for being the inker over Jack Kirby in the Fantastic Four days. And he really captures that Silver Age style. And the pencils here are by Brent Anderson. But like, we're going to get shifts in Rogue, drastic shifts in Rogue. She's one of those characters that the interpretation of her is really up in the air still. Where Wolverine is getting solidified. Storm is still shifting because not every artist knows how to draw her amazing mohawk. But these aren't staples of all the veteran artists. Like these characters have been in flux for a long time. It's not like they're Silver Age Marvel characters that everyone knows how to draw like the back of their hand with some kind of uniformed look. Meaning like Captain America by this moment in time hasn't changed since he returns to Marvel in 1963. So they're 64. But all these other characters are in almost a constant state of flux in the way that they're being interpreted. Maybe except for Nightcrawler. And then look what we get here. John Byrne back on X-Men, which is crazy to see even for a moment in time. It's John Byrne and Terry Austin. You'll see there is an Austin scribble here. I'm pretty sure I wrote that as a kid. That looks like my interpretation of Terry Austin's signature. But like I said about the John Romita one at the beginning, that's not me. It's not me. Looks great. He knows how to draw Peter. He knows how to draw Kurt. They've gotten on with life, and thinking that what happened on the porch in the opening of the comic was no big deal. Peter's towel attacks him. This is weird. He's like, "Oh my god, the towel," and right away he just turns metal and rips it up, and then things go crazy and everything goes metal, and he doesn't know what to do with it. It's a nightmare scenario. So maybe it's one of those things similar to, what was it, Annual 11, where everyone experiences their own little nightmare. He comes across the other X-Men who are costumed up, and they are all metal as well. And he does not know what to make of it. And of course, his powers disappear, and they cover him in metal plates, eventually putting the face on him, and now he's all metal. And he feels that he will never have sorrow again, and then he's free. And he realizes something about his cowardice, and that if he's not safe behind his steel, then he is afraid. So he's feeling that maybe he is, by his nature, a coward. Okay, on to the next one. So on page 9, we're getting Brent Anderson again, and Dan Green on inks. Strange combination. I don't know how well they work. Dan Green being pretty loose as an inker, and Brent Anderson being, I would say, like, house style. We've seen him work on X-Men before, all the way back in maybe some of the 140s and 150s, as well as God Loves Man Kills. So he's had his go with the X-Men a few times. Weird seeing Wolverine eating a banana. Odd choice. Anyway. So again, they're recovering from these weird happenings, and then you get a switch of style, drastic as can be, where here we're getting the one and only Bernie Wrightson, and this one is like a gorgeous drawing. And who's that over Wrightson? Jeff Jones is the inker. I don't know Jeff Jones, but it looks to me like this one is like a photo reference, which is great. It looks beautiful. And she's dealing with, again, that force about not eating. That's the way to draw on a starving, emaciated face. This is horror comics right away, right? This is horror stuff. And as she goes to get the food is also gone rancid. Really creepy. If you don't know Bernie Wrightson, probably most famous in mainstream comics for his work on Swamp Thing, maybe Batman the Cult. But his work, he's considered top notch. The more time he has to put in, his work, if you ever see his Frankenstein art, is some of the best line art maybe of all time in comics. Yeah. So Kitty's dying, of course. Nightcrawler sees her, and then he gets impacted by this strange force, and he goes through his nightmare scenario, being rejected as a monster as a child. And you can see he used, I guess, the caravans of the traveling circus and such as when he's a kid in Europe. And he's going through something internal as well. And this is Charles Vess. I love Charles Vess's stuff. His stuff is really gorgeous. I don't see a lot of his comics, but his covers would be so beautiful. There's a faith episode in A Crisis of Faith. The Visitor struck again, and Kitty goes to try and rescue him. And we're back to some more Brent Anderson, Tom Palmer on inks, and you see each character who's been impacted. It's strange, the color Kitty is if she's got her mask on still, but I think that was maybe a miscolor. And then we move on to something that I've never seen before, except in here, which is Richard Corbin drawing X-Men. Now, Again, I don't know if you know Richard Corbin. I first saw his stuff in Heavy Metal Magazine, and most recently in Hellboy. You know, the Hellboy the Crooked Man is his art. So he is no stranger to a wide variety of textures and forms, and you know, his craft is top notch. When he gets to paint, he is able to use the form of comics to create colors that you haven't seen anywhere else. But of course, this is Deadline, traditional, like mainstream comics, so it's a little different, but beautiful nonetheless. The reflection, and I mean, how impactful is that punch right through the helmet of Cerebro? Really cool. And his version of Toad is unlike anyone else's Toad. His characters are exaggerated and monstrous. As a kid, I did not like this. This is not what I wanted my X-Men comics to look like. But now I'm so happy to see something different each time. There's Scarlet Witch. So weird. Really, really weird. Even like the gutters changing sizes. Just so strange. Blob. But if you want to, you know, have your character attacked by all of these skeletons, corpses, starving, Richard Corbin is the right choice again for this kind of horror. And that's maybe why this is such a strange X-Men comic, because it is so definitely in the horror category. And not every house-style artist is up for taking us into that realm and making us feel it. But the guys from outside of Marvel seem to be best at this. That was one of the things Shooter said also in his blog, was that Claremont and Innocenti, given that they were sort of at top of I guess American comics at the time, with X-Men being the bestseller, and they just had a lot of street cred with a huge range of the industry that Shooter says he himself didn't think he would be able to reach. But having Claremont be like captain of the project, he was able to bring in all sorts of people, and I imagine Corbin's one of them. So Rachel's having her moment here. This art is Mike Kaluta, who would have been like a studio mate of guys like Wrightson and Barry Windsor Smith. Cool to see. So she's struggling, her powers are going. I always loved that one as a kid. I think that's a cool panel. And then we get to see her in her hunter outfit, as she's like hunting down and exterminating, or the hound as they call it. She's a hound. Dark stuff. But neat, surreal, you know, her being hunted by herself. I mean, not easy to do these kinds of things in just line art. But her costume looks great. And then she has an interaction with her mom. This is beautiful. But of course, it's all in her mind. Can you imagine how crazy these reds would be if this was printed on glossy paper, or, you know, if this was digital? But because it's all absorbed, like the yellows and oranges and reds and pinks, they mix so beautifully. It's so subtle and gorgeous. Really nice. Okay, this is the centerpiece for me. Seeing Frank Miller, 1985, drawing Wolverine. I have to get something for a second. Take a look at that. See if it looks familiar. All right. That bookshelf is too tight. So I'm going back to my copy of Wolverine. As we take a look at this, I'm going to see if I find what I'm looking for quickly enough. So seeing, this is Frank Miller while he's working on The Dark Knight Returns, right? And for some people, that's the height of his work, and that's cool. For me, that, you know, I don't know if it is, but it's definitely the most impactful. Maybe I was thinking of this. Maybe there's another one. I feel like there's another where he's taunting a character to come after him. But seeing him come back to Marvel for a moment, using panels in a way that he is using in Dark Knight. And that's why I bring it up. So in the Wolverine thing that I'm looking at, he's doing a lot of widescreen. right? And when it comes to action, he's thinking outside of just 3 tiers. He's doing 4 tiers of panels sometimes. He's playing with page composition. So there's negative space on every single page. It is a different version of Frank Miller, like, you know, in his dream scenario here, dream sequence. So he's playing with the form more than he did in the past, right? He's maturing as a cartoonist. He's trying new things. Really trying to find a specific panel. But when we get to this stuff, he is in the rhythm of Dark Knight Returns, which is done in 16 panel a lot of the time. So it's not just 9 across 3x3, it's 4x4. And you can see both of these are kind of 4x4. This is half the page, so which means it could be there as well. So he's taking one big panel. Each one is actually sort of split in two in a way. Just spoiler, they're both Wolverine. This is Wolverine in his reflection if he wasn't the animal. Here he is that's, I guess, the foreshadow of that idea. But he's playing with this rhythm of pairs and 4s, which turns into 8, which then of course turns into 16, which is what he's working in the Dark Knight Returns. Very, very unusual to see in an X-Men comic, and we're not used to seeing it with Wolverine, although it suits it very well for this kind of scene. Am I wrong? Was this not somewhere else? Was it just the one I was thinking of? I feel like a fool. Pardon me. All right, I'll back off of it because clearly I'm not finding that anywhere in here. But maybe it was just in my subconscious. Moving on. Cool to see he's being inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, which I guess if you like that loose, expressive style, nothing too detailed, nothing too literal, similar to what Jansen was doing, this is pretty cool to see. And he's transformed as the leaves go over and looks at his reflection. There's the version of him that's sort of unchanged by, he's not a mutant. He doesn't have claws. He's just him as a normal man. And it's neat to see. It's super cool. I haven't been telling you who the writers are. I feel a little bad. Other than Stan Lee I mentioned before, but those pages by Wrightson that we saw, those Nightmare pages, those are written by Stephen King. Those Corbin drawn pages, that was written by Alan Moore. Like, it's wild. This sequence is written by Harlan Ellison. And that's also what I mean when I said they were getting in guys they wouldn't normally get. So they're letting the writers write. This isn't Chris Claremont doing this. This is Harlan Ellison. That's pretty crazy. I'm just looking at the list now. There is a George Martin who writes page 35 and 33 to 35. I wonder if that is George R.R. Martin. I'm going to say it is. But you can look it up. And there Wolverine finishes his sequence. Fighting with himself and finding the complete version. I'm human. Human! Love it. And then we get something, again, absolutely crazy. We get Brian Boland drawing X-Men. Brian Boland from The Killing Joke, right? Incredible. Absolutely incredible to see. Craig Russell on inks, also known as Peter Craig Russell, or PCR. We see him over Mike Mignola a lot in the early days. And this is written by Claremont. And, Storm basically goes through the Hall of Mirrors, right? We're still a couple years away from Brian Boland drawing The Killing Joke. And that kind of reminds me, almost like a foreshadowing in his career of that. Storm in different iterations as the Earth Mother, as she's called there, All-American Girl. Crazy Brian Boland, man. Homemaker, Free Spirit as a fairy, The Wanton as a kid. That's why I think where I learned what that meant. And then here, in dominatrix gear, and she fights, and she runs into a room full of, I guess it's the big top, full of circus clown pies, and she gets a pie in the face. And she has to fight a clown. Creepy. And then, you know, Boland is drawing this piece still. And she starts trying to feed everybody instead. Then we move on to Steve Rude. Oh my goodness. Steve Rude, the Rude Dude, known for his character Nexus. A beautiful figure artist. Again, I have not seen him draw this version of X-Men. He does do an X-Men kind of first class type book. And I've unfortunately forgotten who wrote it. But his art is gorgeous. He's a beautiful figure artist. And you see they're all beaten up by the thing that they've experienced. Who's inking Steve Rude? Let's take a look at my list. Carl Potts, okay. Not doing anything for me. Weak on colors too. But okay. Looks familiar. I feel like I've seen this artist on X-Men already. And look at this version of Rogue. This isn't our superhero that we all fell in love with. Brett Blevins, we do see him doing a couple issues. We just recently read one of his, but this is not doing it for me. This is where like Rogue not being solidified as a way that she needs to be drawn and a hairstyle, where, you know, like obviously Silvestri and Jim Lee's contribution changes how we forever see Rogue, but until that point, she's, I would say, misinterpreted by a lot of people. And Al Williamson on ink. So he's doing the best he can with what's there, I think. But how cool or strange. Wolverine covered up. But, I mean, is that not Batman? So they've gone to... Obviously, they're supposed to be in East Africa. I think this does get... You know, the portrayal of people gets... You can definitely bring a critical lens to this. We switched artists here. We are with Herb Trimpe and Sal Buscema. Trimpe probably most famous in my circles for G.I. Joe, the early issues of G.I. Joe, and most famously for The Incredible Hulk. They're trying to do some food relief. And these pages are written by George Martin. Not the producer of the Beatles, but probably George R.R. Martin. Page 35, still that team of Trimpe and Sal Buscema on inks. Weird. This is a weird drawing. But really sad stuff. And Shooter says that he thinks they raised about $500,000 in relief. And that's pretty fantastic. Page 36, we are on to Gray Morrow, written by Bruce Jones. So I don't know who Gray Morrow is, but the art is beautiful. It almost looks like there's some photo stuff happening and some of the faces, but maybe this rendering style or the colors, maybe Gray Morrow would be better off in some with more complicated rendering techniques like brushwork or something like that. Because these flat colors aren't doing any favors. Like Wolverine's mask has the open eyes. I feel like there probably is some amazing Gray Morrow art out there, but it doesn't really work here. So Rogue and the night, she's so impacted by obviously having made contact with this dying child. You know, she can't allow the agony to continue. So in the night, she decides to do it herself. And she takes Wolverine's powers, and then she takes Nightcrawler's powers, Peter's powers, and his haircut, Rachel's powers, and she, with each person, she's like changing the way she looks. She's morphing bit by bit. It's funny, she doesn't notice, like we don't see any part of Wolverine in that contact. But I've always wondered why she doesn't do this more often, because... And there she is at the end. She's taken part of Peter's costume, you know, some metal, and Nightcrawler is there. We don't see any Wolverine in that, but I think that one's awesome. That's a great drawing. Page 38, we're looking at Paul Gulacy. Oh, man. Probably best known for maybe his great work on Shang-Chi. There's a really cool Batman piece he did called Prey from Legends of the Dark Knight. He's really strong. I mean, that's great. And so she's going to handle it on her own. And she goes into this, I guess, some sort of tomb or temple. And inside she's going to fight a monster, right? So here she's facing off against this thing. And she's absorbing. It's too much, too much. Cool. This was written by Steve Englehart, this section. And now we're looking at part written by Jim Shooter and Alan Weiss on art, Joseph Rubinstein on inks. So she's absorbed part of that monster, and now she's this thing. And I hate this. I don't like the inks, as I always, have issues with Joe Rubinstein. So be it. But it's this teleporting, gross monster, and Storm is the one who's fighting against. And the monster is rogue with everyone's powers, including that monster she handled with the tentacles coming out of the back with, interesting protrusion. Anyway, it continues. She can phase. It's so gross. Like, yuck. This is yuck. It continues. As the fight goes on, they're both bantering with each other. So be it. And then, bit by bit, powers start to disappear because the X-Men start to wake up. By this page, now we're looking at Jackson Geiss, who we read some comics of his recently. This is written by Mike Grell and inked by Steve Lealoha. So the X-Men are waking up. Obviously, we see Nightcrawler's back. He helps rescue Storm. Colossus is back. So the powers are starting to, one by one, leave Rogue. X-Men have awakened. Wolverine's back. Like, this is, wow. Very dynamic punch. Looks a little tall for my liking, but so be it. She can still phase, right? Because she's got Kitty's powers still. But, oh, Kitty's back. So now we've just got maybe Rogue and the monster, and who else is in there? That might be it. Magneto's involved. Jawohl, Magneto. Sure. And then Rachel's tasked with trying to get Rogue out of this psychic moment. So yeah, she pulls Rogue's psyche out, or centers her. They bring her down. They have a talk about things, and then whose art is this? This looks pretty classic. Maybe Al Milgrom. What do you think? Page 45. Oh no, Howard Chaykin. Yeah, okay, I see. Chaykin with Walt Simonson on inks. Okay. I wish there was a little more time spent on some of it, but yeah, Chaykin. American Flag. Also the first couple issues of Star Wars. Here, you feel like he's skipping out, right? Like this is underdone. But I think the whole thing was done pretty quick. This one's nice. I like that. And they make peace with the situation. They've got this kid eating again, and they're just going to take it one step at a time and do what they can at a ground level, right? They know they can't solve the problem themselves, but I guess it's that think global, act local kind of approach. And they realize that they can't fight hunger and eliminate it completely because the entity of all the problems that lead to this, the entity's still here. And Wolverine tells Kitty Pryde, "That's right, kitten, but so are we." So they have hope in the face of all of this adversity that they can overcome. But they know it's not going to be an easy one. So things end where they began. Obviously, the problems of famine still exist in both the Marvel world and in ours. But like I said, $500,000 raised, which is what Jim Shooter says at the time, is no small feat. And probably all of these creators worked free to help, raise. Actually, I don't know if they worked free. Maybe they got a very minimum rate. But now this is a Jim Starlin piece on the back. Really weird to see Wolverine with the shoulders that echo kind of the points of his mask. and boots. Even his gloves point a little bit, as if like Starlin doesn't know. Then again, he's got Wolverine sort of becoming small. You see how he's like not even filling out his own underwear or overwear. So it's a weird image. Like Wolverine is, he's starving as he's going. And this is the character they're facing. For better or for worse, that is kind of an oddity within the X-Men collection of comics from the 1980s. But considering all the power that was behind this as a piece of comic book art, it is a phenomenal example of all the different ways to interpret these characters. And I'm pretty struck by it. I hope you enjoyed getting a chance to see that. I hope our good buddy Chris Sanigan is feeling better for next week as well. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Previously in X-Men. All good wishes going to my good buddy Chris Sanigan, writer of Group of Seven, A Most Secret Tale, and Peregrines. Hoping you get well soon, Chris, and we'll get back to this as planned, because it is much more fun doing this with you than doing this by myself. You can find out more about our comics and upcoming appearances at groupofsevencomics.ca. Again, that is with the number 7. You can follow us on social media at Group of Seven on all the major places that one does social media. So please click like on the video, subscribe to the channel, throw your comments in the comment section below. It really does help, of course, with engagement. And we hope to see you again on future episodes of Previously in X-Men. Strange one, but man, I love that cover. It is just imprinted on my brain. I would love to see the original art, as I'm such a student of that stuff, and I couldn't find anywhere online. So if anyone does come across any original art from this comic book online, send us a message. Let us know. I'd love to find out more about that. Besides that, we'll hit you up live next week again. Looking forward to it. In the meantime, thank you, bubs. And everyone out there, please stay Xy, and we'll see you next time.